From Transport Topics in Washington, D.C., this is RoadSigns. Here is your host, Seth Clevenger.
Thank you for listening to RoadSigns, the podcast series from Transport Topics that explores the trends and technologies that are shaping the future of trucking. In this episode, we're going to take you inside the making of TT's 2023 Top 50 Global Freight Companies list, which we just published on November 6th, both in print and online at ttnews.com. This annual list ranks the world's largest freight transportation companies across all geographies and modes of transportation, including truck, parcel, rail, ocean, and air freight, as well as non-asset-based third-party logistics providers. To produce this list, we worked with SJ Consulting Group to rank these companies based on annual revenue from their freight operations. In addition to the main top 50 list, this publication also includes rankings of the largest container seaports and cargo airports in North America. If you haven't already done so, you can get exclusive access to the complete version of our Top 50 Global Freight Companies report by subscribing to Transport Topics at ttn.ws/ttsubscribe. You can also text TT Subscribe to 571-622-0001. And of course, don't forget to check out a fresh episode of RoadSigns every other Thursday. And now, to discuss how we assembled this year's Top 50 Global Freight Companies publication, I'm going to bring in two of my colleagues at TT, features editor Michael Fries and features coordinator Mike Senatori. Thank you both for your hard work on this project, as always, and thanks for being a part of the conversation.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Seth.
So just to get started here, let's talk about the scope of this project and how we put it all together. As I mentioned earlier, we work closely with SJ Consulting Group on the main top 50 list. SJ compiles freight revenue data for these companies, and then we add in supplemental information such as equipment, asset information, executive leadership. But beyond that, we also produce a cover story dealing with international trade and global freight, as well as updated lists of the largest container ports and airports in North America. Mike, you head up the data side of this project, so just spend a few minutes to talk about the work that goes into gathering the information that we present in this publication each year.
Sure. So, as you mentioned, we work very closely with our partners at SJ Consulting Group. So, we take the list provided to us from SJ and we really fill in the blanks on a lot of the information there and prepare it for the publication, adding stuff like company descriptions and executive leadership and equipment and freight asset counts as well. And that information I gather online, either through company websites or their annual reports and those sort of things. The actual revenues we get from SJ, and they do a great job prepping their list for us, and it really makes the data collection process pretty painless for the top 50 list. And for the ports and the airports rankings, those we gather by hand as well by checking with port authority reports, that kind of stuff. The airports we receive from the FAA, they publish their own list of the top 100 United States cargo airports every year. And once we have that, we fill in the blanks with other North American airports outside of the United States, like Canada and Mexico. And that's how we come to the top 100 for the airports. And for the ports, it's really just a matter of finding that data online, either via the port authorities or other sources.
Well, thank you for that overview, Mike. And yes, there's certainly a lot of information that we present here, working with a lot of different sources and, of course, with SJ Consulting as a partner on the project. Michael, you handled a lot of the editing duties for the publication this year, including the cover story. So I think that we can start right there. Just give us an overview of that lead story in the publication and some of the main takeaways from that piece, really looking at port operations.
Sure thing, Seth. One of the things that we've always done with our annuals is we like to take a long form view of what the prior year was and what the upcoming year may be in regards, in this case, to the freight industry, to the ports that we're ranking and covering. And one of the things that we wanted to do with this was to really take that outlook and really niche it. And two of the main segments of this particular industry that we wanted to focus on was automation and infrastructure. When you go to a port, there's always some type of construction going on. And, maybe for the last decade or so, you've seen, things like that, especially in the North Carolina Port Authority, the ports of Long Beach and others, Georgia Port Authority, just to name a few. But, those ports have been under infrastructure projects for quite some time. And right now, especially last year and this year, they're at the completion. Like, for instance, the North Carolina Port Authority, their Southgate Container Complex was just opened in the Port of Wilmington, North Carolina, back in February 2022. And then you have what's going on in Long Beach right now with their Middle Harbor redevelopment project. That was a 10-year effort, and that opened up in 2021. So we're seeing the fruits of that particular infrastructure. And many ports have been, investing, millions, even billions into, their infrastructure project. Of course, for instance, the Port of Long Beach, they've poured nearly about $1.5 billion into infrastructure. So it's definitely, something that's on the front of mind for port operators. And one of the things too, especially since the freight market has softened quite a bit, this is an opportunity for those ports right now to really catch up to the automation and that innovation that's been taking over the trucking industry, but also applying that to the ports so they can communicate and work efficiently with trucking. So just the route of information technology where it's going right now, just in the efforts to provide enhanced visibility and monitoring of the supply chain right now, especially in the sort of flux that's in right now, it's very important. And with this feature for the Global 50 issue, we really want to see how those infrastructure and automation improvements have been helpful for port operators. But yet, there's still work to be done. So we're kind of taking that moment in time and enlarging it to see what the future holds.
Yeah, well, I think that's a great overview. And, we think back to just a few years ago during all the supply chain disruptions and port congestion, during the pandemic, or like, kind of the recovery and surge in demand coming out of the pandemic, and all the delays and backups we saw at major ports during that time frame. Of course, a lot of these infrastructure projects have been a long time coming, but hopefully that will help smooth out the entire global freight transportation system as some of these investments come to fruition. So now that we've provided a good overview of the top 50 publication, I think that it's time to get into the updated rankings. And just taking a look, first thing I think everyone will notice is a big change right at the top. We have Amazon listed for the first time this year, and the company makes its debut at number one. So last year we kind of opened the door for this move when we opened up the list of third-party logistics providers on the top 50. Prior to that, it was all asset-based carriers across all modes, right? Ocean carriers, air cargo, truck, rail. But we added 3PLs last year, and for this year we took it a step further. And to be clear, this is not all of Amazon, right? We're not counting all of their retail sales, which is just enormous. But we're looking at their e-commerce fulfillment and logistics operations, specifically serving third parties. And that's almost a quarter of Amazon's revenue. I mean, Amazon, of course, has built this massive e-commerce logistics, e-commerce fulfillment business over the years. It's an extensive operation that powers its own online retail network. And the company also supports businesses that don't sell through Amazon.com with its logistics operations. And I'm not sure how widely known or appreciated that is. So when you look at Amazon's overall operations, yes, they're primarily this giant in the world of online retail, but they do provide 3PL services through two of its business units. Specifically, it's Fulfillment by Amazon and Amazon Multi-Channel Fulfillment. So Fulfillment by Amazon is handles the e-commerce fulfillment for orders that are placed on Amazon.com. If you order from Amazon, this is the e-commerce operations and fulfillment that's supporting that. And then the MCF division I mentioned earlier offers order fulfillment for sales channels outside of Amazon. So, Amazon is a big player, a huge player in logistics and third party logistics. Uh, even if you're not selling on Amazon. So just looking at the numbers, Amazon reported more than 117 billion in net sales from its third-party seller services in 2022. Again, that's nearly a quarter of the company's total revenue. Obviously, this is a huge change to our list, putting Amazon on the list, and especially at number one. So I want to talk a little bit more about this. Mike, what's your take? You worked on this list last year as well, but what's your take on Amazon appearing at the very top of our 2023 top 50 global freight companies list?
Well, with the change that we made last year that you mentioned to the top 50 criteria, with including more and more of 3PLs, this really felt like the logical conclusion to that. Amazon obviously has a massive reach, and the company's used its position as an e-commerce really industry leader to develop pretty comprehensive fulfillment services, as you said, both for Amazon's own sales and for other merchants on third-party platforms. The two tools, FBA and MCF, they can be used pretty much hand in hand for online retailers, and the company itself actually claims that US based merchants who use both of those services together increase their Amazon.com sales revenues by 38%. So, as you mentioned, I mean, this is a huge division of one of the biggest companies in the world, really. Uh, Nearly 23% of the company's entire total revenue in 2022 came from these services. So, as shocking as it may seem to not see UPS at the top of this list anymore, as we've all grown accustomed to, Amazon's 3PL business is really, it's earned the company that spot atop the list.
Are you feeling the pain of tolls eating into your fleet's bottom line? If so, I want to tell you about BestPass. They offer universal toll management that provides streamlined toll payments, nationwide coverage, and 24-hour account access in a single simple account. Over 15,000 fleets rely on BestPass every day to eliminate the headaches of toll management. That means saying goodbye to paper toll bills, managing multiple toll accounts, and zero visibility into toll spend. Upgrade your toll management in 2024 by visiting www.bestpass.com or calling 888-410-9696.
Well, thank you for that, Mike. And Michael, I'll ask you as well. Again, this is a big change to the list. Your thoughts on Amazon making its debut on the top 50?
It's the bigger get bigger. The amazing thing about it is, just like with groceries, um, Amazon has catapult to the top. I mean, it's there was Kroger. I mean, for the longest time, and I mean, and other groceries and supermarkets were at that top of the list, and then Amazon came in just from entering that space for the first time. They've become the biggest grocer, and it's looking like that's like that as well. What it will look like for the future, and how they will utilize their parcel and their delivery service under that that wing of Port Authority. It remains to be seen, but it's definitely shows you the power of Amazon, and the number one, the efficiency of them having just getting. I mean, I wouldn't say that they've just been into the space, but as you said, as the new parameters are set for this list, Amazon definitely passed those, and really they're showing strength in that particular market. So I think after we all get over the sticker shock of Amazon being number one, I think that they will probably ease into that position, and as the rest as well will still be dominant factors as well. But the industry should know that there's a new sheriff in town.
Yeah, and just to sort of echo or add a little bit of detail to what we were alluding to is that Amazon very well could have been on this list for for many years. It's really the reason why we see Amazon on the list and debuting at number one is not because of some massive change in the last year. It's because we changed the criteria for the list. We opened it up to 3PLs, and what's been challenging in the past is to get good data on the size and scope of Amazon's logistics operations broken out from all the other stuff they do, right? Online retail and there's Amazon Web Services, and so they're a big cloud-based services provider. So lots of these other divisions, and grocery. Michael, you mentioned grocery. With the Whole Foods acquisition. So Amazon, is competing in so many different markets and so many different businesses and industries. But we have the data. We opened up the list, so that's why. So we're just, I think, shining a clearer light on, the the most comprehensive view of freight companies who are indeed the largest in the world. So I think we've strengthened our list, and that's why um, this change is reflected. But once we move past Amazon, we do see a lot of familiar names that continue to dominate the top of the list. And Mike, you mentioned UPS, right there at number two, FedEx at number three. These two giants in the world of parcel delivery and logistics have been at the top of many of our lists for a long time. And UPS, interestingly enough, topped 100 billion in revenue for the first time in 2022. And FedEx is pretty close at 90 billion. Moving beyond that, another big parcel and warehousing company, DHL, out of Germany, is number four. And then the top ocean carrier on our list is Maersk. That's with 80 billion in revenue. And when we go through the list, ocean carriers, for the most part, enjoyed the best year-over-year revenue growth in 2022 compared to the previous year. At least compared to the other various modes of transportation, as we compare the companies on this list. Maersk had a revenue increase of 32% from 2021. So that's quite a huge increase for a company of that size and scope. Next up, we have the U.S. Postal Service at number six, and also another pair of ocean carriers, CMA CGM and Costco Shipping Group. And then Kuehne International and out of Switzerland, and Chinese parcel and delivery firm SF Express is at number 10. One other change I'll mention, one big company, big freight transportation provider that's absent from this year's list is Russian Railways. It's both freight and passenger rail services, but we are only counting the freight aspect. They were number 14 on our list a year ago, but were removed due to the sanctions related to the war in Ukraine. Mike, as you go through the list of the top 50, are there any companies or ranking changes that stand out to you this year beyond the big move at number one with Amazon?
So, two companies that really stood out to me for seeing huge jumps in their revenues in 2022, that they were numbers 4 and 5 on the list: DHL Group and Maersk. DHL Group, one of the largest parcel delivery services in the world. It's a German company, and on top of parcel and mail delivery, they also do logistics and supply chain services, warehousing, freight forwarding, that kind of stuff. And although DHL Group dropped one spot in the rankings this year due to the addition of Amazon, the company's freight revenue took a real leap year over year, increasing by nearly $10 billion compared to 2021, while its total revenue from the entire business also increased by about 6.5 billion. So, so definitely a strong year for DHL Group and Maersk as well. Maersk maintained its spot in the top five despite the addition of Amazon this year, and that's because they overtook the U.S. Postal Service in freight revenue. They sort of jumped a spot ahead of them compared to last year. Maersk is the world's leading ocean shipper, and the Danish company posted a strong 2022 as well. Their revenue from ocean shipping increased by 33% in 2022, and the company said, along with the release of its annual report, that logistics and services revenue in 2022 also jumped by 47%. Uh, in addition to that, their warehousing capabilities more than doubled with the acquisition last year of the former LF Logistics. So In all, Maersk's freight revenue jumped by nearly $20 billion in 2022. Definitely one of the biggest jumps on this list. Its total revenue also jumped by almost $20 billion. So it really cemented its spot ahead of the other fellow ocean shippers in the top 10, CMA, CGM, as you mentioned, and Costco Shipping Group.
For sure. And Michael, I'll ask you the same question. As you peruse the list, are there companies or changes that stand out most to you as you take a look at the updated rankings?
Other than, of course, the Amazon shock. We definitely, as Mike had alluded to, the U.S. Postal Service, lost 2 spots, from being 4 to number 6 now, with Maersk and DHL moving to those. Well, Maersk just just staying ahead at 5, and DHL Group jumping up to 1, while UPS and FedEx dropped down a spot each. But I think as Mike was alluding to as well, with the ocean shippers getting a nice bounce from Ocean Network Express, who's 16 on the list that wasn't even ranked, and as well as Nippon Express, who's new to the list as well. So and I believe both of them are Japanese companies as well. So that just the rise of ocean, and even with rail as well. Even, I mean, there's still some growing there, some growings within that industry as a whole, as things are happening with ocean freight deliveries. So I think it's other than the Amazon shock, there's still new companies, there's still growing companies out there that are still making a mark within the supply chain. Like I said before, it's been in flux, but the companies are making their way to I guess making their way to be more efficient in this new normal.
Yeah. And a finer point on one of those companies you mentioned, Ocean Network Express. That's the holding company that includes multiple major ocean shipping lines in Japan. But we're consolidating them on the list this year, so that's why some of the names, whether it's NYK or K Line you've seen in the past, are now consolidated there. So that's another little wrinkle we added this year. And also for our listeners, just a quick reminder, you can view the entire top 50 list online at ttnews.com. And you can also get exclusive access to the complete version of our top 50 global freight companies report by subscribing to Transport Topics at ttn.ws/ttsubscribe. So as we've been discussing, this publication is more than just a list. It's also an update on the state of international freight and global transportation. We talked a little bit about the cover story about how porter operators have been upgrading their infrastructure and implementing technology to improve efficiency. At the time that they've been recovering from all the disruptions and supply chain issues caused by the coronavirus pandemic. Any other top findings from that story, Michael, that you would want to mention on this in this conversation?
You know what? Just one of the things, the biggest, takeaways that I've got is just that, it's a much needed time for recovery, and when it comes to just cargo volumes in general. And I think, with this list, you see some of that, see some of those things happening within that list. So I mean, I think that as definitely, there's a lot of factors, involved with this year's list, and just how it may shape up for next year. I'm sure that there's, I mean, it probably won't be too much M&A activity, but I mean, but it still has, some, it'll still have some factors when we make this list next year. So I think, just, kind of going into the future, I think that it's going to be, the list may not change. I think some players might, go up and down, of course, but I think as the industry improves overall, I think the industry should be quite a bit steady.
Is your fleet still receiving paper bills in the mail? BestPass wants to upgrade your toll management solution before the end of the year. They offer nationwide toll coverage in a single account and can reduce the time spent managing toll by up to 50%. Over 15,000 fleets rely on BestPass every day to provide deep discounts on toll and industry-leading coverage. See for yourself the BestPass difference by visiting www.bestpass.com or calling 888-410-9696.
One of the more interesting aspects of this top 50 list for me each year is just to see where North America's largest companies, especially in the trucking and logistics world that we cover at Transport Topics, how they stack up against the largest transportation companies globally. And this year, taking a look, we see C.H. Robinson, of course, North America's largest freight broker, is number 19 on the list worldwide, with 23 billion in revenue last year. Another one that's not too far behind is Expeditors International, major freight forwarder, at number 23 on the list with 17 billion in revenue. Going down the list, we also see J.B. Hunt Transport Services, of course, big in intermodal and trucking and logistics, is number 27 on the global 50. And then moving right down the list to see XPO, less than truckload carrier, number 34. And then a few others as well. Landstar System is at number 43. Of course, Landstar operates through a network of independent owner operators and independent freight brokerage agents. So their business model is a bit different than some of the other large carriers, brokers on the list. Knight Swift Transportation, major truckload carrier, of course, ranks number 44 on the list. And Canadian trucking group TFI International is number 45. Also, the last two spots on the list, we have Schneider at number 49 and LTL carrier Old Dominion Freight Line at number 50. So overall, I think that's a strong showing for the North American trucking and logistics companies to see so many of them ranked among the top 50 largest in the world. Mike, what stands out to you when you look at the North American trucking and logistics companies that do qualify for this top 50 list?
Yeah, so although some of these companies might have moved down a spot or two on the list this year, for the most part, these companies have been seeing growth in their revenues year over year. Um, of the companies that you mentioned just before, Seth, all of them except XPO had revenues increase in 2022, and as we all know, XPO had a busy year in its own right, spinning off its truckload brokerage and logistics division RXO into its own company. And of these North American trucking and logistics businesses, JB Hunt stood out to me as sort of making strides in 2022. The Arkansas based trucking company saw a $2.6 billion increase in their revenue, which is a 22% jump from 2021. And this was all in spite of a year where the company really felt the effects of a shaky market, especially with its integrated capacity solutions business. Uh, that segment in particular experienced a 27% decrease in volume uh, in Q4 of 2022 compared to the previous quarter in 2021. So that sort of continued revenue growth despite the difficult market conditions, it just goes to show why JB Hunt is in the position it's in within that market as one of the top truckload carriers in North America.
Yeah, and it's really interesting, I think, to think about what next year's lists are going to look like. Global 50, of course, is the final of the four annual reports, annual top 100 or top 50 lists that we produce at Transport Topics in this calendar year. But and these lists are based on, for the most part, on 2022 revenue. And 2022 was a really unique year, right? I mean, the first half of the year, for the most part, was still a continuation of that freight boom that we saw in 2021. There's a lot of strength in the first half of 2022 in the market that really started to drop off in the second half, and that's continued through this year in 2023. So as we extrapolate to next year, think about how these lists might change. I suspect we won't see the kind of growth that we continued to see last year, despite some of the challenges in the market turning as well as some of the disruptions that were still pretty severe last year, supply chain disruptions that were still pretty severe last year. Which is one of the more interesting uh, elements that we have to consider as the market conditions certainly shift from year to year, and I think we'll certainly see that next year. Michael, before we move on, anything else to add about the North American trucking and logistics companies that you see on this list?
Well, I mean, it's as an American, it's nice to see those American freight companies ranking, as one of the largest across the world. I'm always amazed. Although it's not a company, I'm using air quotes right now. The United States Postal Service. Just when we talk about supply chain disruptions, and we talk about how the freight market is softening, and all these things are happening within the supply chain that are affecting commercial and consumer delivery. We have a business model, which is a government model that's been around for 100 plus years, using the same model and probably still same price target that it's been using for those same 100 plus years, and it's still going strong, and it's one of the biggest the delivery services in the world. So I'm really in awe of that. Just a parcels a system that you can deliver a letter to somebody and have it go across the country for 60 cents. So you still can't beat that. 50 or 100 years later. So in that regard, that's what I'm really amazed about every time when I do this list every year.
Yeah. And of course, some of those services, not necessarily turning a profit on that, right?
Yeah,
Delivering to a rural
yeah.
spot in, Montana somewhere. But it's there's a public service element to it, to make sure that everybody can receive their packages, receive their mail. A final point that I want to bring up on the list here, of course, we talked about our separate rankings of the largest container ports and also cargo airports. Mike, you lead the charge on those lists. So just give us a quick overview of both of those. Right, we have our top 25 container ports as well as our list of the largest cargo airports. As you look at those lists, what are some highlights and what stands out this year?
Sure. So container shipping volumes grew pretty moderately for the top seaports in North America. The real highlight from the container ports ranking is the port of New York and New Jersey overtaking the port of Long Beach for the number 2 spot on that list. Uh, Both Long Beach and the list leading port of Los Angeles had declines in cargo throughput in 2022, as did several of the biggest West Coast ports. And that was due in part to the labor disruptions that resulted from long lasting contract negotiations between dock workers unions and port terminals. The ports of LA, Long Beach, and Oakland, as well as Washington State's Northwest Seaport Alliance, they all dealt with declining volumes last year as shippers really sought out more stable conditions further east. But yeah, all in all, growth in volumes with these large container ports, it was pretty significantly slowed compared to years past. And then taking a look at the air freight list for 2022, the air freight volumes seem to be returning to form last year after a really banner year in 2021. 2022's volumes returned to near pre-pandemic levels as it sort of fell back to earth a little bit after a very strong 2021. Global demand for air freight dipped by 8% in 2022 year over year. And many of the top cargo airports in North America also dealt with declining volumes, including the top 2 airports on our list, which are Ted Stevens Anchorage International and Memphis International. So the kind of economic uncertainty that was felt across the U.S. and kind of the whole continent in 2022, it had a significant effect, and that dip in commercial traffic, consumer spending, it certainly contributed to a weak year for air freight in North America.
Yeah, well, thank you for those overviews, Mike. And it is interesting on the container ports list to see New York, New Jersey edge up to number 2. Of course, when you visit Southern California, the ports of LA and Long Beach are now 1 and 3 on the list, but they are next door neighbors. And in fact, from the viewpoint of being on the water, you need an expert to point out which one is which, because they're connected basically. Just a huge ports complex in Southern California. But interesting to see that New York, New Jersey edges past one of the two giant container ports in the LA area. Looking at the time, I think we've covered a lot of ground here, so I think we can wrap it up right here. Michael and Mike, thank you both for putting together this year's top 50 publication and sharing your insights on the podcast. Really appreciate the conversation.
Not a problem at all, Seth.
Thanks for having us on.
Did you know you can ask Alexa to open Transport Topics? In just 1 minute, you will hear the biggest trucking headlines of that day. Be prepared and start your morning off right with Transport Topics.
So we hope you've enjoyed this in-depth look at the 2023 Transport Topics Top 50 Global Freight Companies list. As a reminder, you can view the top 50 list and related information online at ttnews.com. And of course, if you're a Transport Topics subscriber, you already have a hard copy packaged with the November 6th issue of Transport Topics. If you've enjoyed this episode of RoadSigns, please let others know. Rate and review us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. If my questions have sparked questions of your own, share them with me and the RoadSigns team. You can email us at share@ttnews.com. We'll read them and respond daily. Also, let us know how we did by texting TT Survey to 571-622-0001. And of course, we'll be back in 2 weeks with a fresh episode of RoadSigns. Until then, I'm Seth Clevenger. Thank you for listening.